When I look at America, guys, sometimes it truly makes me sad. I see the rise in crime rates, and I'm not just talking about what's going on the streets. I'm talking about what's going on within the government. If we look at the things that have been rolled out over the past couple of years, legalizing marijuana, legalizing gambling, why are we doing that? Those are vices. Those are things that ultimately lead to poor decision making and ultimately not good things as a society. Yet the government is now making a cut on it. It's almost like they're the mafia to a degree, right? And when I look at America, I think the thing that strikes me as most criminal is the education system. The education system is so broken. There is literally nothing that we could look at within that system and say, we absolutely need to learn those things. Now, I might be taking this to an extreme. I'm not saying math, English, writing, science. I'm not saying those are bad subjects to learn. History to a degree, although they're definitely taking out Bibles, which is the most important history in salvation and human society. But when I look at it, I'm looking at the sense of the things that we absolutely need, right? Every single person that lives in America needs to pay taxes. Why are we not learning about taxes? Every single person in America wants to live the quote unquote American dream for the most part, where they want to buy a house. Why do they not teach you how to buy a house? Or why do they not teach you how to even possibly raise children, right? Think about the things that actually matter. We are not being taught. But what is happening? We see our children are being sent to school. They're sitting in a desk for 8, 9 hours a day. What is that reflective of? It's reflective of the future that they're trying to build for our children, right? They want them to be little worker bees. They want them to be little kids that, grow up and just understand that you're going to sit at a cubicle and you're going to listen to somebody who's in the front, a teacher, or also known as your boss when you get older. And that's the person that you're going to listen to. You're going to have to do what they say and you are just going to follow orders. And you're going to get a little bit of time outside to play and you'll get lunch and things like that. So we're seeing that they're really building out what they want. They want these kind of, in a sense, clones and little workers to do what needs to be done and to not ask questions. And it's very problematic and it's very hard. Why? Because as a parent or, as an adult, as you're growing, what are you seeing? You're seeing this endless cycle of frustration. You don't have enough money. You're looking around. You're like, oh my gosh, the price of gas is going up. I was driving the other day. It was $3.30 that I saw. Why is this happening? What's going on there? The prices of homes are skyrocketing. You want to buy a $500,000 home, which in America isn't really unrealistic. That's, I would say, a relatively median price in a good areas of America. You need $100,000 plus another $25,000 for closing costs. Plus, you're probably going to need to do about $20,000 to $30,000 in renovation on it because the house was lived in and it's not exactly how you would like it to be. And then you're going to spend another $10,000 on furniture. So add about $150,000 to what you need to really buy maybe a house that, could fit a couple kids in there because you just want to have some kids and you want to try to enjoy life and actually have bedrooms to put them in, right? Things along these lines that we are just not taught. We're not taught how to do our taxes. We're not taught how to buy houses. And why we're going to be doing this on the Frankie D'Astoli Show, why we're opening up this new segment of finance is because I think it's so important to learn financial literacy. The school systems, they teach us literacy. They don't teach us financial literacy. And we're going to point out a lot of differences with that. So with that said, welcome to the Frankie D'Astoli Show. So if you're joining the show today and you're coming from the faith side of the Frankie D'Astoli Show, where every Thursday we drop an episode that talks about Catholic faith, I want to thank you so much for joining this section of the Frankie D'Astoli Show. If you don't know this about me, which I'm sure a lot of you probably do at this point, yes, I'm a Catholic husband. Yes, I'm a Catholic father to 2 little children, Bernadette and Francis, and God willing, many more if God deems it, within his will. And also, I am a full-time real estate investor. I have over 40 rental properties with my partner, Steven. We manage those rental properties. We do what's called the BRRRR strategy on basically everything. We buy them, we renovate them, we rent them out, and we refinance them. And throughout this segment of the Frankie D'Astoli Show, as we get into finances, as we get into financial literacy, we are eventually down the line going to dive into real estate investing. Why I feel like that is the strongest asset class to get into. If you're unfamiliar with the word asset, don't worry about it. We're going to be going over it today. But that is, really my bread and butter. And as you continue to listen to the show, my plan here is to really set the foundation. And why is that important? Because anything that you're doing in life, you need a strong foundation. If you want to become, a bodybuilder, let's say, for instance, you need to understand nutrition. You need to understand how to do workouts in the gym effectively and how to actually do the workout itself, right? If you want to go and you want to bench 225, you're not going to be able to just slide out there and start pushing it out, right? Now, some people maybe have that ability and are gifted to do that. But ultimately, what do? You start with just the bar. and you work on form and you bring it down and you align it with your chest and you exhale as you push up. And after you do 12 reps of that, then you throw, 10 pounds on each side and you see how many reps you can get there and you build your way up. And I think that's very important. So if you're listening to this and you came from the faith side and you know absolutely nothing about finance, you know nothing about real estate investing, these first few episodes are going to be super, super critical for you because they are going to set that foundation. Now, if you just know me from the real estate realm and you see that I'm dropping a few episodes in here in regards to financial freedom and real estate, and you are already an investor, or you have some properties, or you might be in stocks, whatever the case might be, some of this stuff might be a little bit redundant, but I promise you this, I really, really feel that about 95% of people that listen into the show today are going to learn something that they did not know. And because I remember even being someone who graduated with a finance degree from University of Delaware, which even though it still took me 6 hours to do my own taxes on TurboTax a couple of years later, when I graduated with a finance degree and I read this book that's on the table right here next to me, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I learned more in that book than I learned 4 years at University of Delaware in finance. And that's not an exaggeration. I'm being serious. This book here, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, absolutely changed my mindset. It's not so much a real estate book. It is a financial literacy book. It changes your mindset. It makes you understand and see things in a different light. And I really recommend everyone to read this book. I have a handful of interns that have been coming on in D&D Equities, my company with my partner, Steven. And every single assignment that I give to them first is to read this book. Before they even step foot into a house with me, I tell them you have to read this book. And the reason that is because I need them to change their mind. Right. And ultimately, they're not there yet. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why they're not necessarily there, but they're on the path. And really, within these first few episodes, my goal is to get through some of the lessons in this book. We're not going to get through all of them. So that's why I really encourage you to get yourself a copy and to read it, right? I'm trying to set up an Amazon storefront at this point. So in the future, I could just point you to my Amazon storefront and I can tell you what to buy over there. But ultimately, I don't have that yet. So go on Amazon, go wherever you get your books, Barnes & Noble. I love a good bookstore, and get Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I highly recommend that. But over these first probably 2 to 3 episodes on the Tuesday segments, the finance segments, we are going to go through some of the critical lessons in this book to really set that foundation. And then we are going to start to build upon it. And really, guys, in about 12 weeks from now, I want you, if you know absolutely nothing about finance, to literally be comfortable, ready to tackle a real estate deal, or at the very least, understand a pathway to financial freedom. That is the goal within these next, kind of 3 months for the most part, as we drop an episode a week. So that is the goal. I hope that you're going to enjoy this segment, and we're really excited to kind of start bringing it to you. But to understand financial freedom, I actually want to start in the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. So this is page 91 in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I remember reading this and I really resonated with me. I read this book in 2020, and I'll give you guys a little bit of a backstory first. So I was working in medical device sales. I graduated University of Delaware in 2019. Immediately upon exiting, I started working for a medical device sale company where basically I would go into the operating room and I would work with orthopedic surgeons to implement, devices such as like wrist implants or elbow implants, things along those lines for whenever anybody broke something, right, in their arm typically. And I was doing this. I was interning with this company a couple of years before, and I remember being so stoked about all of this. I was like, man, I'm going to make so much money. And if you have any idea of the medical device sale industry, it is a very lucrative industry. You could easily be a millionaire there. There's no doubt about it, right? But what I started to realize is I looked at my boss, and I love my boss to death. I still do. He's a really good friend of mine. We went out to dinner a couple of months ago. We have plans to go to dinner again in a couple of months. He was at my daughter's baptism. But I looked at his lifestyle and I kind of said to myself, can I see myself doing this, right? He had, 2 young girls. He was married. He was working about 80-hour work weeks. He was on call basically all the time. And he ran his own company for sure. And he had employees like myself who were doing, some of the heavy lifting. But overall, the buck stopped with him. And it was his relationships with a lot of these surgeons, right? So there was a lot on the line for him. He always wanted to make sure that it went well, as any business owner does. But I think what was important is I was looking at that lifestyle and I was kind of saying, yeah, he makes a lot of money, and, he has a really nice house, and he's got, a nice car, and he's got a great family, and all of this stuff is really, really awesome. But is that the lifestyle that I want to live? Do I want to be working 80-hour work weeks and really just making sure that I need to be working hard in order to make a lot of money? And of course there's humility in that and hardworking aspects, and I'm not taking away from anything there. But what I will say is when I looked at that lifestyle, I kind of started questioning, do I want that to be my future? that is when this book entered into my hands. And I read it in 2020. It was actually during COVID. And it really shifted my mindset. And what I realized was happening was that I was trading time for money. I was working, and in exchange, I was getting money. And in order for me to get more money, I needed to work more. And that's what kind of started to shift the gears. And like I said, this wasn't a real estate book, but it helps you kind of change your ideas on how you look at money and how you go out and make it. So once I read this book, I started to have a little bit of change of heart. I think this was about May that I read it, maybe April or March that I read it in 2020. And ultimately, I decided that I wanted to learn how to invest in real estate. And a big topic in this book that we are going to talk about is instead of trading time for money, you need to trade time for education. That's a big factor. So what did I do? I started going out and I started applying to a bunch of real estate investing companies, right? I applied as a property manager. I tried to become a property manager. I tried to become a project manager, even though I had no construction experience. And I was just getting denied. And by the grace of God, I came across this one company on LinkedIn, and it was for an acquisition specialist. And I'll go into the story just a little bit more in depth here. An acquisition specialist is someone who answers the phone calls. That's it. That's all they were responsible for doing. Answer the phone calls, book appointments. That's it. I applied for this job. Now, keep in mind, as I'm going for this job, I'm making about $120,000 a year as a 22-year-old kid in medical device sales. Pretty decent for a 22-year-old. I don't know many of my other friends at that time that was making that kind of money. And I had just gotten engaged to Christina. And, we like to do nice things. I love to go to steakhouses. I'd love to live kind of more of a lavish lifestyle. And anytime we got together on the weekends, I was always spending money. I was shopping at the mall every other day. Like I was one of those types of people. And as I am applying for this job of acquisition specialist, the salary, I'm not even kidding, is $35,000. But I really was committed to the fact of trade time for education, right? I'm going to go in with this company. I'm going to learn. I'm going to work from the ground floor up. I'm going to build myself up. I'm going to learn a lot. And then eventually I'll go and I'll start buying my own houses. I'll start my own company. So as this happens, I apply for acquisition specialist and I get denied. And I'm like, this is bananas, right? I work in medical device sales. I'm literally in the operating room with the smartest people in the world. And I'm telling them as a 22-year-old kid what to do, how to do the surgery essentially. And I can't get a job to answer a phone call for $35,000 a year. I'm like, what's going on here, right? So what do? I've done what I've done in a lot of other situations. I respectfully reply back to the email and I say, hey, I very much appreciate your, response to my application and I respect the decision. If you don't mind me asking, I'd like to just understand a little bit more about why I was denied. And then what I did after was so important, and all my faith people that were listening on the show on Thursday, you're going to like this. After that, I went to church and I prayed about the situation. And I said, Lord, into your hands, I commend my spirit. I surrender my future to you. You guide me, guide my next steps here. Whatever I'm meant to do, I will follow in your direction. After that, I left the church. As I'm walking out, my phone vibrates. I get an email from the company offering me an interview. But what I notice is it's not an interview for the acquisition specialist role anymore. It's an interview to be what's called a market manager. Long story short, I do the interview, I get the job. Now, big pay cut still. We're talking about, 120,000 at medical device to now roughly 65 to 70,000 with this real estate investment company. But again, big jump from that acquisition specialist of 35,000. If I was willing to take it at 35,000, I promise you I was happy getting 65,000, right? But ultimately, I knew that I would go in there and I would learn, I'd be educated. And that was very important. And I did that. I worked for that company for about 3 years. I went from a market manager to running their branch in Philadelphia, to opening their branch in New Jersey, to then running multiple branches in Texas and Alabama and Tennessee. So I grew a lot with that company. And ultimately, I ended up leaving and starting my own business with my partner, Steven. And now we have over 40 rental properties. And there's a lot more to that particular story. I will say that. However, we'll save that for a separate time. Let's get into Rich Dad Poor Dad. One disclaimer here, guys. My phone is not on silent at this moment. So if you hear any text or anything along those lines, my wife and the kids are out right now. And whenever, we're not together or they're not in the home while I'm doing stuff, I like to keep my phone on because just in case they need me, I want to make sure that I'm available to them. I also have about 4 closings going on within the next 2 weeks. So it could also be lenders. But let's get into Rich Dad Poor Dad. This is page 91, and we're going to start with a little story. And I want you to see if this resonates with you the way it resonated with me when I first heard it. How the quest for a financial dream turns into a financial nightmare. The classic story of hardworking people has set a pattern. Recently married, the happy, highly educated young couple now share a cramped rented apartment. Immediately, they realize that they're saving money because two can live as cheaply as one. The problem is the apartment is cramped. They decide to save money to buy their dream home so they could have kids. They now have two incomes and they begin to focus on their careers. Their incomes begin to increase. As the income goes up, their expenses go up as well. The number one expense for most people is taxes. Most people think it's income tax, but for most Americans, their highest tax is actually Social Security. As an employee, it appears as if Social Security tax combined with the Medicare tax rate is roughly 7.5%, but it's really 15% since the employer must match the Social Security amount. In essence, it is money the employer can't pay you. On top of that, you still have to pay income tax on the amount deducted from your wages for Social Security tax, income you never received because it went directly to Social Security through withholding. Going back to the young couple, as a result of their incomes increasing, they decided to buy the house of their dreams. Once in their home with a mortgage, they have a new tax called property tax. Then they buy a new car, new furniture, new appliances to match their new house. All of a sudden, they wake up and their liabilities column is full of mortgage and credit card debt. Their liabilities go up. They're now trapped in the rat race. Pretty soon, a baby comes along and they work harder. The process repeats itself. Higher income causes higher taxes, also called bracket creep. A credit card comes in the mail, they use it and max it out. A loan company calls and says their greatest asset is their home, and it's appreciated in value. Because their credit is so good, the company offers a bill consolidation loan and tells them the intelligent thing to do is to clear off the high interest consumer debt by paying off their credit card. And besides, mortgage interest is a tax deduction. They go for it and pay off those high interest credit cards. They breathe a sigh of relief. Their credit cards are paid off. They've now folded their consumer debt into their mortgage. Their payments go down because they've extended their debt over 30 years. It's the smart thing to do. Their neighbor calls to invite them to go shopping. The Memorial Day sale is on. They promise themselves they'll just window shop, but they take a credit card just in case. I run into this young couple all the time. Their names change, but their financial dilemma is the same. They come to one of my talks to hear what I say, and they ask me, can you tell me how to make more money? So Robert Kiyosaki is fantastic. And the way that he explains things, it's very, very simple. But I think a lot of us can relate to a situation like that, right? And even myself, guys, yes, I have a real estate business, but I very much see habits of myself from that old time of just understanding that I want to spend money, right? And that particular lesson, which we're going to talk about, is a very big lesson on financial literacy. And the main topic on that is it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. But before we even get into that, we need to start at the very, very beginning. And the very, very beginning is Rich Dad's first lesson, which is the rich don't work for money. But before we get into this, let's hear real fast from one of our show sponsors. Are you a real estate investor or an aspiring real estate investor wondering, where do I get money to buy deals? I want to direct you to Renovo Financial. Now, disclaimer, I am not sponsored by Renovo. I get absolutely nothing for promoting them. I simply promote them because I believe in their loan product and I very much enjoy working with their team. I've worked with dozens of lenders over the past 2 years, buying over 40 rental properties, and I could say with absolute certainty, Renovo has been my best experience. Their team is very hands-on. They will walk you from start to finish to getting a deal done if you're brand new, or if you're an active investor, they will make sure that they get you competitive rates and will do everything they can to help you grow your portfolio. Now, there's two ways that you could get in touch with Renovo. Number one, you could reach out directly to my lender, Joe Welke. His email is jwelke@Renovo Financial. You can just let him know that Frankie D'Astoli sent you and he will set you up and get you moving. Or if you want a little bit more of a soft intro, you could DM me directly at my Instagram, Frankie D'Astoli_REI. Ask for an introduction and I will put you two in touch. Renovo has phenomenal terms. They have a great team and they are for the investor. They will listen to your goals, which you're looking to accomplish, and they will work to be a true partner in that journey with you. So before we get into this first lesson, which is the rich don't work for money, let's just break down the book within itself, just so you guys have a little bit better grasp on it, right? So the book's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now, there's two father figures in Robert Kiyosaki's life, one that he calls his rich dad and one that he calls his poor dad. Now, his poor dad is actually his biological father. And it's kind of counterintuitive because when you hear his lifestyle, you're going to think a little bit more of him as the rich dad, right? He's a highly educated guy. He's got a PhD. He's got a stable career. He's been with his company. I think it's for, quarter of a century, 25 years, something along those lines. And he really believes in working hard and getting a career and earning a paycheck. Now, those things are not bad things. And as Kiyosaki points out in this book, most of the time, for most people, that's actually the best way to go. But he calls his dad the poor dad, and there's reasons why, which we'll uncover in these first few episodes of the Frankie D'Astoli show. His second father figure is his friend, his best friend Mike's dad, right? And he calls him his rich dad. And the reason that is a little opposite from his poor dad. He's not nearly as educated as his biological father is. But however, he is an entrepreneur and he is an investor, and he has multiple businesses that he's in the process of building and forming out. And what he really pushes is you need to understand how to make money. And that's really what the focal point of lesson one comes about. So as Mike and Robert dive into this book, because Robert's writing it, he's about 9 to 11 years old, I believe, in this first lesson. And the first lesson is him and Mike go up to Mike's father, their rich dad is what they call them. And he says, how do we make money? And instead of rich dad, opening up a lecture or telling him, regular advice of, hey, this is what you need to do, he says, basically, I'm going to show you. And what he does is he gives Mike and Robert a job. And this job is for 10 cents an hour. Now, this is in the 1950s. So you got to understand that, right? Now, that from what Robert's saying in the book is that was cheap back then as well. But it wasn't, anything too crazy. Now, it only took a couple of weeks, however, for Robert to get a little frustrated with what was going on because he was working for Mike's dad, and ultimately he was missing baseball games. He was missing time with his friends, and he got frustrated. And he opened up to his biological father about this, situation. And what did his poor dad say? Well, his poor dad said, whoa. You're only getting 10 cents an hour, but you're doing all of this work. You deserve a lot more. You're worth at least 25 cents an hour. So, of course, Robert gets all worked up. And what does he do? He goes to Mike's dad and he says, I'm going to confront him. I'm going to tell him that he's taking advantage of me. And what happens is he goes to Mike's dad, and Mike's dad listens. He sits back in his chair and he says, wow, you sound like a lot of my employees. And Robert's like, what are you talking about? You're really taking advantage of me here. I'm out unless you give me, 25 cents an hour. And he's basically like, you sound exactly like my employees before I either fire them or they quit, right? And ultimately what's happening in this situation is Rich Dad is teaching Robert at a very young age about what the realities are for basically every single American outside of, 1 to 3% of people. The realities of the rat race that is just this never ending cycle of you make money, you pay bills, you start to expand your lifestyle, you need more money to pay more bills, to pay for more of that expansion in lifestyle. And it's just this never ending circle, right? And it's like, it's funny. I think about this stuff all the time. I hear people in the real estate space that are like, yeah, I'm going to net $2 million this year. And I'm like, whoa, that's insane. Like that's an insane amount of money, but yet they still have money problems. And even if you're an investor and entrepreneur, this doesn't take you away from in a quote unquote, the rat race, right? There is a real estate investing rat race too. I don't want this to be totally, twisted just for people that have W-2 jobs, but this is the reality, right? Especially for the W-2 job sector. It's you go, into a job, you make money, you realize that in order for you to make more money, you need to work harder or you need to get a raise, you need to do these things. And it's this never ending cycle. And Robert really breaks this down from lessons with his rich dad, where he talks about fear and he talks about desire. Most people are in a W-2 job and are taking money and, going for raises because they have this fear. They have this fear of not having enough money to pay their bills or to do anything along those lines. And the opposite end of that, but also, cohesive with that is desire, right? It's this consistent, I need more. I want more. In a sense, you could call it greed to a degree, although Kiyosaki doesn't necessarily use that word, but it's this desire of I want more and I need to work harder and make more money, right? And in Rosary and Real Estate, we really talk about this. If you're unfamiliar with Rosary and Real Estate, that is a free community that I've built, that I owned. We're coming out with some great courses and some things along those lines, but we really talk about spiritual poverty and generational wealth because we're, in the real estate space, we want to build generational wealth. We want to pass down wealth to our children. And we're actually going to talk about the definition of wealth today. It's going to be different from what you actually believe you think that it is. And then we also talk about spiritual poverty, though. Spiritual poverty, having that ability to detach from the things of this world and to cling to Christ and to really focus on the faith, having faith in whatever circumstance, whether you have a lot of money or you don't have a lot of money. And that's what's actually going to keep you going. But a little bit of a sidetrack there. So we talk about the rat race, we talk about fear and greed in that, kind of sector in this first lesson. And then we really get into the education of financial literacy, right? Why that's so important here in this first lesson, in this first chapter. And Rich Dad says that the schools, as we talked about in the beginning in this intro, what are they teaching? They're teaching people to become employees. They're teaching people to work for a paycheck and to be specialists in a certain career. And what do schools not teach that really what should be, really focused on is how does money work? What is the purpose of money? How can you use money to your advantage rather than money using you to its own advantage, right? Also, how to invest in real estate, how to invest in stocks, how to do all of these things. Again, things that they don't teach you in school, but yet at the same time, they give you access to these things. And I'll tell you guys a quick story. I remember, before I was in the real estate space, when I was working in medical device sales, I wanted to be an investor. I read this book, right? And I wanted to be an investor. And I remember I was like, I'm going to dabble in stocks a little bit. And what did I do? I went on YouTube and I looked up the first kind of guru on YouTube that told me to invest in stocks. I invested in his stocks. All of the stocks lost money, right? And that's not to say that he didn't have, his reasons for why he believed in those stocks, but ultimately they didn't do good. The best stock I ever invested in was Peloton during COVID. I sold too early, but that's how it goes. Stocks, in my opinion, is like gambling. That's how it goes. But how to invest, how to build your asset column, and how to make money work for you, right? That's financial literacy. That's financial education. That's the stuff that school's not teaching, and it makes no sense. However, it does. Because if you believe the overarching theme of what the education system's for, it's to build little worker bees, right? To put you in, sit you at a desk for 8-9 hours, have somebody in front of the desks telling you what to do, doing those, doing homework assignments, going home, doing more work. It's this creating of a mentality, of a habit that is ultimately going to lead to you just only knowing that. Only knowing how that works, right? And even the testing system is like that. It's like, cool, you take a test, there's right or wrong answers. If you get the test, you pass the grade. It's like, it's very similar to a paycheck when you start to think about it. So here's the simple terms of this. For lesson 1, the rich don't work for money. They have money work for them. That is the difference, guys. That is the difference. How do you get money to work for you? If you start thinking about that, if you start having your mindset think like that, that is how you could start to understand how to become rich, right? And ultimately how to become wealthy, which we're going to talk about next. So lesson 2 is all about financial literacy, right? The title of the chapter is Why Teach Financial Literacy? And ultimately what it really boils down to, the kind of quotation in the first part of chapter 2 there is, it's not about how much money you make, it's about how much money you keep, right? And even in my example of, real estate investor making $2 million and him kind of wondering how am I going to, make ends meet this month, that's an example of how someone who makes a ton of money can still be in a bad situation versus someone who makes not so much money. So let's actually bring it to even more extremes, so you guys kind of get a little more of a realistic picture. Take a doctor or an attorney or a very high paid income accountant or financial planner, something along those lines. They make a lot of money. Let's just say they make $500,000 a year. That's a lot of money, right? But at the same time, they're like, man, I can't make ends meet this month and I'm just surviving. And I feel like I'm constantly falling in this trap where I just need more money. We talked about the rat race, right? Well, look at the high income earner like a doctor. Where are they getting crushed? They're getting crushed in tax, right? They're in the highest tax bracket. They're also getting crushed in the fact that they have so much student loan debt and medical school debt, things along those lines. So they have a lot of baggage that they're paying off, right? And then on top of that, they've just worked so much of their life. They've now opened up, they went from making no money for about 9 years post-grad to now having all of this money and not necessarily having the education on how to use it. They don't know how to invest it. They don't know how to, literally make money work for them rather than them work for money. Now let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Let's just say you have a minimum wage person. I'm a renovation guy. So let's just say they work at Home Depot, let's call it, right? And maybe they make $50,000 a year, but their expenses are very, very low. And, they're netting still, they're keeping $2,000 every single month and they're putting in their savings account and then they're investing it and they're, buying good deals and they're buying, they're invested in some funds and things along those lines. And eventually they save up enough and they buy their first property. And now they have an asset column that they're building. And ultimately that person can be more wealthy than the doctor. And we're going to talk about that all in here. But a few things that I really want you to take away from this second lesson that we're going to be breaking down is number one, you need to understand how money flows. That's very important, right? Number two is you need to understand what creates income. And number three, what drains income, right? So let's break some of this stuff down here. So I am going to give you the very, very simple formula that's in Rich Dad Poor Dad that is so simplistic that it almost sounds like rhetorical, but it's not, right? And it goes like this. The rich acquire assets, the poor and middle class acquire liabilities they think are assets. That's it. So in the book, Rich Dad basically drops this line to Mike and Robert and just kind of leaves it there. He doesn't even go too much in detail because he wants them to literally just marinate on that thought. And I'm going to say it one more time. The rich acquire assets. The poor and middle class acquire liabilities that they think are assets. Now, to understand this, we need to understand the definition of an asset and the definition of a liability. And as we're doing this, I'm going to look it up right now, right? So the definition of an asset in when I just looked it up on Google right here is a useful or valuable thing, person, or quality. That's what an asset definition is. A useful, valuable thing, person, or quality. So let's think about this. What could be useful? A frying pan could be useful, right? A nice frying pan. Who's the big chef? Gordon guy. His frying pan, or Guy Fieri maybe he's got a frying pan. That could be useful. A new set of golf clubs could be really useful. A big house to fit, a bunch of kids and your stuff. That could be very useful. Those are all useful things that I could think of, right? Now let's look at liability. What is a liability definition? Let's pull this into the Google search real quick. So liability definition comes up as the state of being responsible for something, especially by law. Okay. So that doesn't really tell us much, right? The state of being responsible for something, especially by law. The example here is the partners accept unlimited liability for any risks they undertake. All right, that's formal, right? So what are we seeing here? We're seeing the difference between literacy and financial literacy. Financial literacy does not look at words, it looks at numbers. This is so important to understand, right? And if I asked you right now, hey, John, or whoever's listening to this, you own your house. Is your house an asset or a liability? What would you say? Most America and any people out there would say that it's an asset, right? And Kiyosaki, when he came out with this book in 1997, I believe was the date, he was totally ridiculed for flipping this on its head and saying your home is a liability. And in order to understand that, we need to understand the financial literacy definitions of asset and liabilities, not the literacy definitions that they teach you in English class. English class is not paying the bills unless you are an author, right? Or, for some reason you have some degree that actually attains to that, and maybe you're an English teacher, right? But overall, your literacy is not going to pay your bills. It's not going to make you wealthy. It's not going to help you out in any time that you need when it comes to money. You need to understand financial literacy. And Kiyosaki points this out beautifully. He says, assets put money in your pocket. Liabilities take money out of your pocket. If you understand that basis, now you can understand why rich people, wealthy people buy assets and middle class and poor people buy liabilities that they think are assets. So let's just say, man, I have really started to get into golf, and I'm going to buy a nice set of golf clubs, and I'm going to buy them. And you know what? They're great clubs, right? They're Odyssey, Ping. What are the other ones? I'm not the biggest golfer, truthfully, right? Those types of clubs. And they're only going to go up in value. Even if I use them, I'll be able to sell them and I'll still make some money on it. You look at that as a potential asset, right? Or you say, man, I'm going to buy this car and it's going to give me better quality of life. I'll have a better car. I won't worry about car problems. I'll be nice and air conditioned in the summer, right? That's asset, sure, because it actually increases your quality, right? If you take the literal, asset definition in the dictionary, but from a financial literacy perspective, it's not an asset, it's a liability. Why? Because it's pulling money out of your pocket. The golf clubs that are costing you $1,500 to buy it with the bag, that's pulling money out of your pocket. Probably even more than that, honestly. The car that's, $60,000 sticker, but you're going to lease it and you're going to, or even you're going to buy it and you're going to pay $500 a month, that's a liability. It's pulling money out of your pocket. Now let's bring it to the big one. Your house that you currently live in. Like I live in my house right now. My mortgage on this house is $2,700 a month that I live in. Is it an asset or a liability to me? It's a liability. Now, sure, it provides good quality of life. It's a roof over my children's head. It's a place for, my wife and I to build memories. Absolutely. There's so much value in that from a literal perspective. Sure, it's an asset in my heart, I guess you could say, but it's a liability from a financial literacy perspective. You need to understand those differences. And if you understand those differences, you're going to be significantly better off because, again, poor and middle class people buy liabilities that they think are assets. So let's go a little bit further here, right? Let's talk about some examples on what are actual assets that put money into your pocket. Rental real estate. It's my biggest focal point, right? And again, we will be building up to this, guys. I want you to understand this on the Frankie D'Astoli show. We will be building up to this, but rental real estate, you buy a property and it is, $1,000 a month for the mortgage. And you have a tenant in there that's paying $1,200 a month. It is now an asset for you. The tenant is paying the mortgage for you and it's generating $200 a month for you in income, right? Businesses that you own that run without you, this is very specific that Kiyosaki talks about. If you own a business and you are working 80 hours in that business, kind of like my boss that we talked about a little bit in the beginning, although I love and respect him, he doesn't so much own an asset, right? And to a degree, yes, it puts money in his pocket, but he has to work for that. When we think about assets, guys, we really want to think about things that don't involve us actually physically working. And even to my degree, right? My partner, Steve, and I, we own this business. I work on this business all the time. So there's, to a degree, I'm an employee within my own business, of course, but the rental properties, they can generate money if I'm not working on them, right? And that's important to understand. Stocks and dividends. If you buy stocks and they pay quarterly dividends or the stock's gone up in value, that's considered an asset. Royalties from books, music, content, notes, or interest income, things along those lines. There's a little bit more dissecting. But what is a liability? Let's talk about some of these. Your personal residence, as we already talked about, right? That home that's taking money out of your pocket with a mortgage payment every month. If you are not renting out a room in that home or doing some sort of house hack, which we will be breaking down, then that's obviously considered a liability from that perspective. Car payments, as we talked about as well. Credit card debt, you have a Discover card, an Amex, or whatever the case might be, that is running up a charge and you're paying that every single month. That's bad debt. Consumer loans, boats, any luxury items with financed things along those lines, that's obviously not good stuff. So remember this, again, baseline, asset puts money in your pocket, liability takes money out of your pocket. And if you increase liabilities, you are reducing the ability to have financial freedom. That's very, very important. So what I'm going to do next, I'm actually going to do a screen share here, guys, because Kiyosaki, the way that he breaks things down is he really does it based off of drawings, right? Based off of drawings, based off of descriptions. So he breaks everything down using graphs. That's a big thing. He really kind of tries to be, vision focused. And that's how his rich dad taught him and his friend Mike from a very, very young age. So it's really nice. He kind of provides us with these very, very simple accounting graphs. And he really emphasizes the point that you need to understand at the bare minimum the basics of accounting if you want to have financial freedom, if you want to generate wealth. So what we see here in these three graphs that you guys are able to see right now is you have the poor, the middle class, and the rich. And if you're listening to this on a podcast and you can't see, don't worry, I'm going to be breaking everything down. Now, in each of these three graphs, there's two charts. The first chart, the top chart, is the income statement. Now, the income statement contains two things, income and expenses. The second chart is the balance sheet. The balance sheet also contains two things, assets and liabilities. And now, if you guys know, assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out of your pocket. Now, the question is, where does that money flow? If it's flowing in your pocket, it's flowing through income. If it's flowing out of your pocket, it's flowing out through expenses. So when we look at the poor, we're going to start at the poor. You'll notice one thing here if you're looking at the two charts. Number one, the income statement is pretty full. It has a lot of things on the expenses. It has only one thing in the income. However, both have containments. The assets and the liabilities in the balance sheet are totally empty. So when we look at the poor person in financial terms, we see that they have a job. That's the origin of money. That money then flows into the income section, which is labeled their salary. And then it flows through the expense columns, which is where the money is outcoming, right? And as you can see, it literally exits the chart. It exits the chart out. So the income flows in through the salary. It then goes down to the expenses. And what expenses do we see in the poor chart? We see taxes, rent, food, transportation, and clothes. Now, granted, no matter what, whether you're rich, poor, whatever the case might be, food, clothes, transportation, some of those things are going to be non-negotiables, right? You're going to have those regardless, right? What we're really trying to understand here is the flow of money. So again, the poor, it starts with the job, it enters the income statement through the salary, and it flows out through those expenses. Then you look at the middle class. The middle class, however, is a little bit different. You'll see that their income statement has some stuff, one thing actually, in the income portion. It has a handful of things in the expenses. And then when we look at the balance sheet, we'll notice that it is very, very tilted. The asset column, fully empty, nothing there. The liability column has a few items in there. So let's break this down. They also have a job. That job produces a salary, which is that inflow into the income. Now, from there, however, the income on the income statement flows through to the balance sheet, which goes through liabilities. And what are some of those liabilities? The mortgage, the car loans, the credit card debt, the student loans debt. From there, out of the liabilities, it flows through the expense column in the income statement. And the expense column is taxes, mortgage payments, car payment, credit card payments, student loan payments, all of that bad debt, and it's flowing there. So you can see here, when we look at the poor person, what's similar there versus the middle class. The poor person doesn't have assets or liabilities, right? They're just basically working their job to pay the minimal expenses, rent, food, clothes. The middle class has maybe some more money than the poor person does through their job. However, they're not using that money to buy assets. They're buying liabilities, a bigger house, a nicer car, more credit card debt. And that flow is now going from the income statement through those liabilities back to the income statement in the regards of expenses. Now let's look at the rich, right? What do we see at the rich? We see that the rich has a healthy balance for the most part in regards to the income statement. They have items in income, more items than we see on the middle class and the poor, and they have less in regards to expenses. And then when we look at the balance sheet, this is really the biggest difference. We see much more stacking on the asset column versus the stacking on the liabilities. However, there's both, right? So let's talk about this. Where the money originates for the rich is different than where it originates for the poor and middle class, because the poor and middle class, their money originates from a job. Whereas with the rich, it originates from their assets. Again, assets are putting money into your pocket. So what kind of assets do we see on the rich's balance sheet? We see real estate, stocks, bonds, notes, intellectual property, things along those lines. The money flows from the asset column into the income column, right? And that income column comes in forms of rental income, dividends, interest, royalties, things along those lines. And from here, it's not described in this chart per se, but from that income column is where the liabilities and expenses are paid, right? But the big difference here is, where does the money originate and how does it flow? If it's not flowing through an asset column at all, you're in the poor and middle class. If it's flowing through an asset column, you are in the rich class. Now, does that make you wealthy? This is the last segment of this episode that we're going to talk about. So just to kind of, before we get into the definition of wealth, let's talk about this. We talked about the first lesson. The rich don't work for money, right? They make money work for them. What does that mean? Well, when we look at this second lesson here, financial literacy, we get the answer to that. We see that the rich have money work for them. The asset column, their investments work for them, and they pay their expenses. They pay their liabilities. We're not working for the money at that point. The money is working for our advantage. That's lesson one. Lesson 2, we did a little bit of, breakdown in accounting. So you have a good understanding of some very, very basic accounting terms, the income statement and the balance sheet. You need to know those two things. You need to understand flow of money. And the last thing we're going to talk about is wealth, right? So wealth, I'm just going to do a stop on the share screen here. Wealth on Kiyosaki terms is not how much money you make, right? You are not a wealthy person if you make $1 million a year. That's not how it's measured. It's actually measured in time. It's measured in how long you can last with the money that you have coming in, right? So let's use an example. You make $1,000, to keep numbers really, really simple. You make $1,000 a month. You have expenses for $2,000 a month. By Kiyosaki's terms, your wealth would be 15 days. If you're using basically a 30-day calendar, right? A 30-day month calendar, your wealth will be 15 days. Now, if you make $2,000 a month and your expenses are $2,000 a month, you are quote unquote wealthy. That's how he looks at it. Because your expenses are covered by the money that you have coming in from your assets, not from your job. Your job does not make you wealthy because your job could be taken from you at any moment. Sure, your assets can be taken from you too, but you own those assets. That's your money that's producing because you own it, not because someone is writing you a paycheck, right? So that's very important to understand. Your wealth is determined by time. So if you were to leave your job tomorrow and you had, let's just say, $20,000 in your savings account, and every single month you had $10,000 in expenses, your wealth is 2 months worth. You are 2 months wealthy. Now, if you have $100,000 in your savings account and your expenses are $10,000 a month, you are 10 months wealthy, right? If all of the money stopped, you had no money coming in, but you had $10,000 in expenses and you had $100,000 in savings to live off of, you would be wealthy for 10 months. That's how Kiyosaki looks at it. And this is a really great way to look at it because, again, it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. And I remember, to throw a situation here, when I left my real estate investing job to go start my own company, I left in June of 2024. I had $6,000 in the bank account. Now, it's quite interesting. I had $6,000 in the bank account. I had just moved into my new primary residence where I have $2,700 a month coming out. I have a 6-month-old daughter, and I made this decision to leave. And there's a lot of faith that comes in that, right? So I suggest you guys, if you're not already, listen to the faith stuff of my Frankie D'Astoli show. It's significantly better than this. I can promise you that. But I had $6,000 and I had at that time about $8,000 in monthly expenses. So I really was about 3 weeks of wealth. And you kind of just have to bootstrap it and say, I'm going to make this happen. And by God's grace, we were able to do that. And it wasn't always pretty. It's still not pretty. But overall, that's how you can measure wealth, right? So key takeaways from this very, very first foundational episode, guys, that's really, really important. The rich don't work for money. They make money work for them. You need to understand financial literacy, especially the difference between assets and liabilities. Go buy assets, don't buy liabilities. And to understand how to do that, you need to understand that assets put money in your pocket, liabilities take money out of your pocket. And lastly, wealth is measured by time. Do a quick calculation right now. I really want to encourage you guys to do this. Do a quick calculation. How much money, or I should say it this way, how wealthy are you right now? If you left your W-2 job, would you survive and how long would you survive for? If you have assets that are generating $10,000 a month and your expenses are $8,000 a month, congratulations, you're financially free. If you have no assets and your expenses are $8,000 a month and you have no savings, you are quote unquote poor. That's how it's looked. That's how Kiyosaki describes wealth. And when you get to that point of your wealth equaling your income equaling out to your expenses, and that income is generated by your assets and it nets out to zero, you have enough money every single month where you could cover that, you are quote unquote wealthy. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this foundational episode of the Frankie D'Astoli Show. I look forward to having you guys back next week as we continue to build on this and we set a good foundation for finance as we then get into talking about investments. So as I always say, pray the rosary, buy real estate. I'll see you guys next week. God bless.